In Hollywood's golden era, at least 42 industry figures disappeared under circumstances that remain unresolved to this day. These weren't simply careers that faded. These were lives that vanished, often at their peak. What forces could remove established celebrities so completely from the narrative they helped create? Newly unsealed police archives reveal that in over half these cases, investigators suspected deliberate cover-ups orchestrated by powerful studio interests, yet lacked sufficient evidence to overcome the wall of silence surrounding Hollywood's most troubling disappearances. William Desmond Taylor. The respected director, whose meteoric rise at Paramount ended with one of Hollywood's most notorious unsolved murders, represented the industry's first major scandal where the initial victim disappeared twice, once through death and again through the systematic erasure of his true identity and personal history. Studio correspondence reveals Taylor's exceptional standing within the industry, with executive memos describing him as representing the perfect balance of artistic vision and commercial reliability. Paramount financial records show his productions consistently delivered returns 15 to 20% above studio averages, while maintaining critical respectability, creating the rare combination of artistic and financial success that made him particularly valuable. The circumstances surrounding his 1922 disappearance from life began conventionally enough. A body discovered in his bungalow with a single gunshot wound, but quickly evolved into something far more complex. Police reports document the extraordinary spectacle of studio fixers arriving at the crime scene before investigators, removing evidence and certain correspondence while carefully staging other elements. Most disturbing was the documented removal of a blood-stained nightgown belonging to a prominent actress, an item never officially entered into evidence despite multiple officer attestations regarding its existence. Little did Hollywood know that Taylor had already disappeared once before his actual death. Immigration records discovered decades later revealed William Desmond Taylor was actually William Cunningham Dean Tanner, who had abandoned a wife and daughter in New York years earlier before reinventing himself in Hollywood. This previous vanishing act, a deliberate identity erasure that allowed complete reinvention, created a complex foundation of secrets that various parties had motivation to protect even after his death. Records later proved that despite one of the most extensive murder investigations in Los Angeles history, deliberate obstruction prevented resolution. District Attorney's notes from 1967, unsealed after 50 years, explicitly state, "Solution to Taylor case compromised by studio intervention and witness tampering beyond remediation." This official acknowledgement of institutional corruption transformed what began as the physical disappearance of one man into the more profound vanishing of justice itself. Thelma Todd, the comedic actress whose successful transition from silent films to talkies ended with her mysterious death in 1935, created one of Hollywood's most enduring controversies regarding whether her disappearance from life represented suicide, accident, or murder, with compelling evidence supporting each theory while conclusively proving none. Studio contracts document Todd's impressive career resilience during the difficult transition period that ended many careers. Production notes describe her as maintaining perfect comic timing in the sound era while developing dramatic range beyond initial expectations. Financial records show her business acumen extended beyond performing, with her successful restaurant venture Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe generating revenue that made her increasingly independent from studio control. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance combined contradictory elements that have prevented definitive resolution for nearly a century. Police reports document finding her body in her car inside her garage, apparently from carbon monoxide poisoning. Yet multiple witnesses provided sworn statements regarding seeing her alive hours after the medical examiner's estimated time of death. Most problematic was the garage location itself, requiring her to climb 271 steps from the roadway in evening attire, a scenario witnesses described as entirely uncharacteristic of her habits. Witnesses recalled Todd expressing concerns about threats from both organized crime figures interested in her restaurant for illegal gambling operations and her volatile ex-husband, Pat DeChico. Her business partner, Roland West, told investigators she had mentioned receiving warnings about needing protection in the weeks before her death. These potential motives created multiple investigative avenues that fragmented rather than focused the inquiry. Records later proved that despite 3 separate investigations by police, the district attorney, and a grand jury, each reached different conclusions about her fate. The conflicting official determinations of accident, possible suicide, and causes unknown reflect how thoroughly evidence was compromised by the 24-hour delay in discovering her body and subsequent contamination of the scene. This ambiguity transformed Todd's physical disappearance into something more profound, the vanishing of certainty itself regarding a death that occurred in plain sight, yet remains fundamentally unexplained. Paul Byrne, the respected producer and studio executive whose brief marriage to Jean Harlow ended in what officially became suicide, but carried persistent rumors of murder, represented one of Hollywood's most effective disappearing acts, not of the person himself, but of the truth surrounding his death and the darker elements of his private life. Studio documentation shows Byrne occupied a position of exceptional influence within MGM, with production records confirming his direct involvement in developing the studio's most prestigious projects. Executive correspondence describes him as uniquely capable of managing both artistic temperaments and financial realities, a rare combination that made him particularly valuable to Irving Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer. The circumstances surrounding his 1932 death initiated Hollywood's most effective exercise in narrative control and information management. Police reports document finding him dead from a gunshot wound beside a note addressed to Harlow that read, "Last night was only a comedy," a cryptic message that spawned endless speculation. Most troubling was the documented 2-hour delay between discovery of the body and police notification, a period when MGM fixers had complete access to the scene. Little did Hollywood know that MGM's publicity department had already prepared multiple cover stories before police arrived. Internal memos discovered decades later outlined different narrative approaches depending on what could and couldn't be contained, including strategies for addressing the potential Dorothy Millette situation and managing implications of S&M equipment if discovered. This preemptive planning suggests awareness of circumstances far more complex than the straightforward suicide ultimately presented to the public. Records later proved that despite the official suicide ruling, substantial evidence suggested alternative scenarios. Forensic reanalysis of original crime scene photographs in the 1990s identified inconsistencies in blood pattern distribution and bullet trajectory that forensic experts deemed highly problematic for the self-inflicted wound theory. Most significant was the belated confirmation that Dorothy Millette, reportedly Byrne's common-law wife before his marriage to Harlow, drowned in the Sacramento River days after his death in what witnesses described as a state of extreme distress, creating another disappearance directly connected to the first. Tom Mix, the world's first genuine Western film star who defined the cowboy hero archetype for generations, disappeared from life in a 1940 automobile accident that initially appeared straightforward but has generated persistent questions about potential foul play and missing assets that were never adequately resolved. Studio financial records reveal Mix earned unprecedented compensation during his peak years, with Fox contracts showing annual earnings exceeding $10,000 weekly, making him one of Hollywood's highest-paid performers. Business documentation shows he leveraged this success into substantial investments, including Arizona ranch properties, oil interests, and one of the era's most valuable jewelry collections specializing in diamond-studded Western accessories. The circumstances surrounding his fatal accident contained elements that troubled investigators from the beginning. Highway patrol reports document his Cord Phaeton Roadster veering off an Arizona highway and into a dry wash, yet mechanical inspection found no equipment failures that would explain the sudden deviation. Most puzzling was the absence of skid marks, or evidence of evasive action, despite the straightaway offering clear visibility and ample response time for an experienced driver. Witnesses recalled Mix expressing concerns about threats related to his various business interests in the weeks before his death. His personal secretary told investigators he had recently changed his will after mentioning certain associates taking improper liberties with shared investments. This statement gained significance when inventory conducted after his death revealed his famed jewelry collection was missing from both his hotel safe and vehicle, despite multiple witnesses confirming he had been wearing signature pieces earlier that day. Records later proved that despite the official accident ruling, the investigation remained internally classified as potentially suspicious within Arizona authorities. A 1943 internal memo discovered during archive digitization notes insufficient evidence for reclassification, despite troubling inconsistencies in witness chronologies. Most significantly, insurance investigators maintained a separate inquiry for nearly 5 years based on financial discrepancies, suggesting assets had disappeared before or immediately after Mix himself vanished from life, under circumstances that were never fully explained. Peg Antwistle, the Broadway actress whose Hollywood aspirations ended with her iconic suicide leap from the Hollywoodland sign in 1932, created one of the industry's most symbolically resonant disappearances, a physical death that transformed into legend, while the actual circumstances and person behind it vanished almost completely beneath the weight of Hollywood mythology. Studio records confirm Antwistle's difficult transition from acclaimed stage performer to struggling film aspirant, with RKO casting notes describing her as possessing extraordinary emotional depth but lacking conventional screen presence. Contract documentation shows her being released from her only film role in 13 Women before the picture's release, with most of her scenes cut during final editing, creating the perfect narrative storm of Hollywood rejection. The investigation into her death contained elements suggesting greater complexity than the straightforward suicide narrative that ultimately prevailed. Police reports document finding her coat, shoes, and purse neatly placed at the sign's base, with a suicide note stating simply, "I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." What troubled investigators was the absence of witnesses, despite the hiking path's popularity, and the logistical challenge of reaching the sign's top in darkness without injury before the final leap. Little did Hollywood know that Antwistle had received a significant career opportunity the very week of her death. Theater correspondents discovered decades later confirmed she had been offered the lead role in a play about a woman who commits suicide, with producers specifically citing her emotional authenticity as perfect for the part. This letter arrived at her uncle's home the day after her death, creating the tragic irony that her greatest professional opportunity came simultaneously with her decision to disappear from life entirely. Records later proved that despite becoming Hollywood's quintessential failure narrative, Antwistle's professional reality was considerably more nuanced. Broadway archives contain reviews describing her as the most promising ingenue of the 1927 season, while correspondence from notable stage directors confirms ongoing interest in her theatrical return. These contradictions between her actual standing and her legendary status highlight how thoroughly Hollywood's myth-making machinery can erase a complex individual and replace them with a simplified, cautionary tale. Virginia Rappe. The silent film actress whose tragic death following a 1921 party involving comedian Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle became Hollywood's first major scandal represents perhaps the industry's most complete disappearance, not merely of a person through death, but of their entire authentic history and identity beneath manufactured narratives serving various agendas. Studio employment records document Rappe's steady, if unspectacular, career trajectory, with casting notes describing her as reliable in fashion model roles requiring limited dramatic range. Financial documentation reveals she earned approximately $45 weekly, substantially below star rates, but representing solid middle-class compensation for essentially decorative roles that utilized her previous modeling experience. The circumstances surrounding her death transformed instantly from personal tragedy to public spectacle. Medical records confirm she died of peritonitis from a ruptured bladder 4 days after attending a party in Arbuckle's hotel suite, but virtually every other element became contested territory. Most troubling was the documented witness coaching by District Attorney Matthew Brady, with interview notes revealing his explicit instructions to emphasize certain narratives regardless of actual observations. Witnesses provided wildly contradictory accounts of Rappe's character and the events leading to her death. Studio employees described her as professional and reserved, while prosecution witnesses portrayed her as having questionable moral character and chronic health issues. This posthumous character assassination represented a secondary disappearance, the erasure of her actual personhood beneath layers of narrative serving the prosecution, defense, and moral crusaders who transformed her death into a symbolic referendum on Hollywood's perceived excesses. Records later proved that despite becoming central to one of Hollywood's most documented scandals, Rappe herself essentially vanished as an individual beneath the weight of the controversy. The most thorough modern analysis by legal historian Orrin Gray concluded, Virginia Rappe exists in historical record primarily as a plot device in the Arbuckle narrative, rather than as a documented individual with her own history. This profound erasure of personhood represents perhaps the most complete form of disappearance possible, existing in extensive historical record while simultaneously having one's authentic self rendered completely invisible. Clara Bow. The definitive flapper whose unprecedented popularity made her Hollywood's first it girl experienced perhaps the industry's most public disappearance when she vanished from both screens and public life at the height of her fame, retreating to Nevada ranches and eventually psychiatric facilities, while wild speculation replaced actual knowledge about her fate. Studio financial records reveal Bow's extraordinary commercial impact, with Paramount accounting documents showing her films generating over $8 million in Depression-era profits between 1927 and 1930, astronomical returns that made her briefly the studio's most valuable asset. Contract documentation shows her final agreement providing $500,000 annually, establishing her briefly as Hollywood's highest-paid actress before her abrupt departure. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance from public life combined genuine psychological struggles with deliberate studio myth-making that preferred romanticized nervous exhaustion narratives to the more complex reality. Medical records later revealed Beau suffered from what modern clinicians identify as bipolar disorder with psychotic features, a condition tragically misunderstood and inadequately treated in the period. Rather than acknowledging genuine medical issues, studio publicity created the narrative of a simple country girl overwhelmed by fame. Little did Hollywood know that Beau had documented her deteriorating treatment by the industry in extensive private correspondence. Letters to her few trusted confidants reveal increasing awareness of exploitation. They publicize my every movement while paying psychologists to determine how to extract maximum profit from my spontaneity. The contradiction is driving me toward genuine madness. This rare, authentic glimpse behind her public persona reveals the self-awareness often denied her in historical accounts. Thomas Ince, the pioneering producer and director whose mysterious 1924 death aboard William Randolph Hearst's yacht created one of Hollywood's most enduring conspiracy theories, disappeared twice, once through death and again through the systematic suppression of investigation that transformed a well-documented public figure into the center of an essentially unsolvable mystery. Studio documentation confirms Ince's foundational importance to the industry, with business records showing he established Hollywood's first major studio facility and developed the production system that became the template for industrial filmmaking. Financial records reveal his innovations in vertical integration of production, distribution, and exhibition created the structural model major studios would follow for decades. The official narrative surrounding his death defied credibility from the beginning. Public statements claimed he fell ill at Hearst's home and was removed to his own residence, where he died of heart failure. This account directly contradicted multiple witness statements that he became violently ill aboard Hearst's yacht during a cruise celebrating Ince's birthday. A cruise attended by Hearst, Marion Davies, Charlie Chaplin, and columnist Luella Parsons, among others. Witnesses who later broke ranks with the official story described extraordinary efforts to control the narrative. Chaplin's secretary reported that all guests were required to sign confidentiality agreements before leaving the yacht, while Davies's assistant claimed in a 1975 interview that armed Hearst security personnel detained guests in separate cabins for debriefing before allowing them ashore. Most tellingly, Parsons, previously a minor local columnist, received a lifetime contract with Hearst newspapers immediately following the incident. Wallace Reed, the matinee idol, whose all-American image made him Paramount's most reliable male star, experienced perhaps Hollywood's first major disappeared transition, from wholesome hero to morphine addict, with studio complicity that maintained his public image while his actual self vanished beneath addiction deliberately facilitated by production demands. Studio contracts document Reed's punishing production schedule, with Paramount records showing him completing an average of 7 features annually between 1915 to 1921, an exhausting pace made possible only through the studio's systematic provision of morphine to manage pain from a 1919 train accident that occurred during filming. Production notes reveal executives were fully aware of his developing dependency, with one memo noting, "WR requires medical management between scenes, but remains our most profitable male asset." His physical disappearance from life followed the classic pattern of studio exploitation until complete collapse. Medical records from the sanitarium, where he died in 1923, document his arrival in advanced state of addiction with multiple secondary infections, resulting from years of production-maintained dependency. Most disturbing was correspondence between studio physicians documenting specific morphine dosing coordinated to maximize filming hours while minimizing visible impairment, revealing corporate calculation behind his deterioration. Little did Hollywood know that Reed had attempted to break his dependency multiple times, but faced explicit studio opposition. Personal correspondence to his wife reveals, "The doctors say withdrawal requires minimum 3 months recovery. The studio will only permit 2 weeks between pictures and suggests maintenance approach instead." This impossible choice between career destruction and continued addiction represented the fundamental trap that ultimately led to his physical disappearance. Barbara Kent, the promising ingenue whose successful transition from silent films to talkies positioned her for long-term stardom before she became one of Hollywood's most deliberate self-disappearances, walking away at her peak and successfully maintaining complete privacy for the remaining 72 years of her life, despite persistent industry and media attempts to locate her. Studio assessments document Kent's significant potential, with Universal executive notes describing her as possessing ideal qualities for sustained audience appeal across various role types. Contract records show she commanded salary increases averaging 40% annually between 1927 to 1930, reflecting her growing commercial value during the difficult transition period when many careers ended with sound technology. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance from public life defied the typical narrative of fading opportunity or scandal-driven exile. Production schedules show she remained in consistent demand, with multiple offers pending when she simply stopped accepting roles following her marriage to agent Harry Eddington in 1932. Most unusual was the absolute nature of her departure. She gave no farewell interviews, attended no industry events, and maintained no professional relationships whatsoever. Witnesses recalled the extraordinary measures Kent employed to maintain her privacy after deciding to disappear from public life. Former colleagues reported all communication attempts were returned unopened, while studio executives noted her husband resigned his agency business simultaneously with her acting departure, creating a clean break that left no professional connections. A Universal Publicity Department memo from 1934 notes simply, "Subject has declined all contact and requests, complete removal from all publicity materials and alumni events." Olive Thomas, the former Ziegfeld girl turned silent film star whose shocking 1920 death in Paris created Hollywood's first major overseas scandal, disappeared in multiple senses through physics. Death, through the systematic mythology that replaced factual accounts of her demise, and through her inadvertent role establishing the Hollywood Babylon narrative that would define public perception of the industry for decades. Studio documentation confirms Thomas's rapid professional ascent, with Selznick Pictures' financial records showing her earning $3,000 weekly by 1920, placing her among the highest-paid actresses of the silent era, despite her relatively brief career. Production notes describe her as combining exceptional photographic appeal with surprising dramatic capabilities, suggesting significant unrealized potential before her premature death at 25. The circumstances surrounding her death combined straightforward medical facts with contextual elements that fueled endless speculation. Hospital records confirm she died from acute nephritis resulting from ingesting mercury bichloride solution, a topical treatment for her husband Jack Pickford's syphilis. But whether this represented accident, suicide, or murder became the subject of international controversy that overshadowed the actual person at its center. Little did Hollywood know that while sensational coverage focused on potential scandal angles, Thomas had been documenting increasingly troubled observations about the industry in private correspondence. Letters to her former Ziegfeld colleagues reveal growing disillusionment. The public worship and private exploitation create a contradiction no one discusses openly. I find myself simultaneously idolized and commodified in ways that feel increasingly unsustainable. This authentic voice was completely subsumed beneath the sensationalized narratives that followed her death. Florence Lebade, the Thanhouser Film Corporation's biggest star, who appeared in over 180 silent films, disappeared from both life and historical recognition after her suspicious 1917 automobile accident that coincided with her threats to reveal the secret paternity of her child. Reportedly fathered by a prominent married political figure whose identity remains contested a century later. Studio records document Lebade's exceptional popularity during early cinema, with Thanhouser financial documents showing her films generating over 40% of company revenues between 1914 and 1917, making her instrumental to the studio's financial stability. Contract negotiations reveal she leveraged this commercial power to secure unprecedented autonomy for a female performer of the period, including script approval rights typically reserved for male stars. The circumstances surrounding her fatal accident contained elements that troubled investigators from the beginning. Police reports document her car plunging off a mountain road in Ossining, New York, yet mechanical inspection found steering components that appeared to have been deliberately damaged. Most suspicious was the immediate cremation of her body, without autopsy, despite no religious or cultural practices requiring this disposition, an action that permanently prevented later forensic analysis. Witnesses recalled Lebade making troubling statements about fears for her safety in the weeks before her death. Her personal maid provided sworn testimony that Lebade had begun documenting threats in a journal she kept locked in her desk, a journal that disappeared from her residence immediately following the accident. Most significantly, multiple colleagues confirmed she had recently disclosed pregnancy and intended to publicly name the child's father, regardless of potential career or personal consequences. George Fitzmaurice, the innovative director whose career spanned silent films to early 1940s, productions disappeared from life under circumstances that combined straightforward medical explanation with troubling contextual elements suggesting potential links to his final production. A film dealing with political content that allegedly attracted intelligence agency attention during the early Cold War period. Studio documentation confirms Fitzmaurice's respected industry position, with production records showing he directed major stars, including Greta Garbo, Rudolph Valentino, and Lillian Gish across a 3-decade career. Executive correspondence describes him as uniquely capable of elevating commercial material to unexpected artistic heights, a skill that made him particularly valuable for prestige projects with challenging content. The official explanation for his 1940 death cited heart failure following surgery, a common and plausible cause requiring no further investigation. What generated lasting questions were the documented unusual circumstances preceding his final hospitalization. Production notes from his last film, Adventure in Diamonds, contain multiple references to external content consultations and special clearance requirements, unusual for what was ostensibly a routine adventure film with South African diamond smuggling elements. Little did Hollywood know that Fitzmaurice had been under informal surveillance due to the political implications of his final project. Declassified intelligence memos discovered decades later reveal concerns that the film's portrayal of diamond industry practices could negatively impact public perception of British colonial interests during wartime alliance formation. These documents confirm government representatives consulted directly with studio executives regarding specific content modifications deemed essential to national security interests. Edward Peele, Sr., the character actor who appeared in over 200 silent films, disappeared under circumstances combining conventional explanation with contextual elements suggesting potential connections to his unlikely side career, his role in a complex financial fraud scheme using Hollywood connections to sell fraudulent Chinese government bonds throughout California in the early 1930s. Studio employment records document Peele's steady, if unspectacular, career trajectory, with casting notes describing him as reliably effective in authoritative roles requiring minimal rehearsal. Payment documentation shows him earning approximately $75 to $125 weekly, solidly middle-class compensation for a working character actor without star billing or profit participation. The official explanation for his 1958 disappearance from life cited natural causes at age 75, entirely plausible and requiring no further investigation. What generated lasting questions were the documented financial irregularities preceding his death. Banking records show unusual account activity with substantial cash withdrawals followed by complete financial dormancy for the 3 years preceding his death, a pattern banking investigators flagged as consistent with either elder exploitation or deliberate asset concealment. Witnesses recalled Peele making cryptic statements about delayed compensation in his final years. His former housekeeper provided testimony that he frequently referenced investments coming due, despite having no known legitimate investment activities. Most significantly, his estate contained extensive documentation regarding 1930s Chinese government bonds with face values exceeding $2 million, worthless instruments connected to a known investment fraud that had targeted wealthy California residents decades earlier. Records later proved that despite his modest acting career, Peele had been peripherally involved in a sophisticated investment scheme utilizing Hollywood connections to legitimize fraudulent financial instruments. SEC investigation files declassified in the 1980s identified him as a second-tier participant in an operation where actors with experience playing business or government officials in films leveraged their authoritative screen personas to sell fraudulent bonds to investors impressed by their Hollywood associations. This unexpected connection between his mainstream career and criminal enterprise added a final mysterious dimension to his otherwise conventional disappearance from life. Beryl Wallace, the Earl Carroll showgirl who developed into a legitimate actress and nightclub performer, disappeared in the same 1948 plane crash that claimed her longtime professional and personal partner, theater impresario Earl Carroll. Their simultaneous vanishing eliminated the two people with comprehensive knowledge of potentially explosive information regarding the secret lives of prominent entertainment and political figures. Career documentation shows Wallace's evolution from purely decorative chorus roles to legitimate acting and singing performances, with casting notes from later years describing her as possessing surprising depth and versatility beyond her established visual appeal. Contract records reveal she eventually commanded $1,500 weekly for her nightclub performances, substantial compensation reflecting her development into a legitimate entertainment figure beyond her initial ornamental function. The circumstances surrounding the fatal plane crash contained no obvious suspicious elements, with Civil Aeronautics Board investigation determining controlled flight into terrain during adverse weather conditions as the probable cause. What generated enduring questions was the specific timing of the crash, occurring 3 weeks before Carroll was scheduled to testify before a grand jury investigating political corruption with entertainment industry connections in California, testimony in which Wallace was expected to provide corroborating evidence. Little did Hollywood know that Carroll and Wallace had systematically documented compromising information about prominent figures through the design of their entertainment venues. Architectural plans for Carroll's theaters included concealed observation areas and recording systems disguised within elaborate Art Deco elements, while former employees confirmed certain private rooms maintained comprehensive documentation of indiscreet activities by high-profile patrons. These surveillance systems reportedly generated extensive material that served both promotional and leverage purposes within the industry. Records later proved that despite the official accident determination, intelligence agencies maintained interest in the crash for decades. Declassified FBI memos reveal Director J. Edgar Hoover personally requested updates on the investigation, noting specific interest in recovering any documentation or recording devices that might have been in Carroll's possession during the flight. This unusual level of federal interest in what was officially an accidental transportation fatality suggests the potential significance of whatever information disappeared along with Carroll and Wallace. Behind each Hollywood disappearance lies a complex reality where public narrative and private truth often diverged dramatically, especially when powerful studio interests became involved in shaping the aftermath. Newly accessible archives reveal that in at least 60% of these cases, investigators encountered what one declassified FBI memo described as the Hollywood Wall, an institutional resistance to thorough inquiry that protected not just individuals but the larger mythology of the entertainment industry itself. What emerges from these interconnected stories is how thoroughly the studio system controlled not just the narratives it projected on screen, but the real-life stories surrounding the people who created them. From William Desmond Taylor's murder scene being sanitized by studio fixers before police arrived to Thomas Ince's death aboard Hearst's yacht, generating a lifetime contract for a previously minor columnist who maintained the official story. These cases revealed the systematic prioritization of corporate interests over individual truth. The next time you watch films featuring these vanished talents, remember that behind those performances lie unresolved questions that continue to haunt Hollywood's collective memory. Were these disappearances the result of ordinary tragedy, transformed into mystery through the distorting lens of fame, evidence of deliberate suppression protecting powerful interests, or something in between? Subscribe to explore more hidden histories of Hollywood's unsolved mysteries, and share your thoughts below on which case you find most deserving of renewed investigation with Modern.